Very good. So it's been a little bit. So what have you been up to?
Researching, parenting, enjoying the finer things in life, or at least attempting to at different points along the way. Um, had a very challenging year last year, which much of your audience will probably be familiar with if they've followed any of my overlapping content. It was a tough time. I think it was a tough time for everyone in a lot of ways, and managed to get through that coming into this now very, very exciting and momentous 250th birthday year. And I have to tell you, Mr. Jaco, the research continues to yield just the most incredible nuggets of being on the right track with respect to humanity, from the beekeeping situation that recently occurred at the White House and the broad symbolism behind what that means, both literally and figuratively, as well as historically and ancestrally. When you look at that and you look at other things like the actual targets of some of these military operations in the Persian Gulf, which I find just absolutely, palpably fascinating. A lot of non-state actor targets being included in this. Several ships seized now by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, flying multiple flags from multiple jurisdictions, clearly trying to evade things. And for Trump coming out there and saying that the entire Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the ocean, while that is true in the greatest sense, you have a lot of aligned paramilitary forces on the ground in that area, especially those that go around the IRGC's main level command components and try to interface with the patriots that you can find. And believe it or not, there are some of them within that organization, within the main Iranian military, and how those communications are being shared, I believe, with forces in the area that are aligned with those and the targets they're actually taking down. This is a long sort of inaugural response to your opening question here, but it shows that we have a tremendous component of directionality with we the people as opposed to against it. And it's easy to forget that when we look at how the pressure keg has to operate, because if we're going to slay a hydra and it's sitting on our living room couch, there's going to be a very unpleasant environment going on in our own home while that process occurs.
Yeah, very, very good points. Yeah, so much to cover, and you've done exceptional in your research in the past and insights that were way ahead of the ball game. So we always appreciate your insights when you come in and give us some really good info. So the ballroom. I was just talking about the ballroom. It's really being set up. Somebody in the titanium glass. They have titanium fencing that's out along the White House that goes so deep that a bulldozer can't knock it down. They're going to have. I was just mentioning to the audience that sniper positions. It's drone proof. It's rocket proof. From the positions high up on the ballroom, they'll be able to survey a lot of the Washington D.C. area and keep it safe. All right, so very, very interesting. And then deep below the ballroom, military hospital and military facilities and so forth. So it sounds like they're getting ready to do not only nice ballroom events, but also potentially set up for maybe coming wars with other nations. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting that you should bring the ballroom up, because I think the ballroom is something that is, historic and is setting a very important precedent for the first time here. And that is the relationship between the commander in chief of the armed forces and the armed forces themselves as a separate and subservient entity, but separate nonetheless from the civilian sector. The ballroom allows that relationship for the first time since pre-Civil War, at least, and perhaps for the first time ever, to be entirely untainted by outside influence and outside espionage. And that espionage, oftentimes, as you're aware, having lived it a number of years, that espionage most commonly comes from those circles that take the longest to get themselves the closest to you, because it's the most deceptive and subtle way to get into those inner circles. And if any leverage can be gotten through the obtaining of national security information, or the selling of that, or perhaps the actual taking out of an assassination, if you will, of high echelons of command, and the threat being real, when it comes to gatherings of that nature, which we know will have to happen as we go into this technological era. I think the need for the ballroom is sort of prima facie obvious to a lot of people on its face, but it shows in a bigger way that the dynamic within the Pentagon and how the Pentagon and the White House interact with one another has fundamentally changed now. There's a lot of middlemen that are now out of the way. There's a lot of agency policy and protocol that has now been proliferated just in the last 13 months, especially inside agencies like FBI and DNI and others that really restrict them to their lanes and what their lanes are supposed to be with respect to how the government works. And those lanes are not supposed to dovetail directly and firstly, in other words, natively, into the military lane. The military is supposed to be able to analyze what it analyzes and then share its conclusions with the need to know individual organizations that are a part of the government. And that, of course, is established by Congress and the president. And so looking at what's happening right now with the ballroom, is a stopgap is being put into that entire apparatus to allow the proper flowing of the water of the information, if you will, to ensure that the different obstructions that have been built, like dams in that information channelway, can be removed or circumvented and bypassed, and primarily creating at the end of the line a closed watering hole of information that is insular and is truly on a constitutional need to know basis for national security. And we, the people, going forward, will have the ability to determine how much of that should be transparently given to the nation by virtue of the laws that are passed by the people and signed by the president.
Yeah, very good. And it's brilliant points. When I look at this as you're talking, he's not going to be able to go to the Pentagon if something really goes down and he has to respond right away. He can't go to Andrews and jump on the Air Force One and hit the skies, which makes him vulnerable. So it makes him vulnerable if he has to go to the Pentagon. I don't know if they have a underground rail system going over to the Pentagon, and I probably do. But regardless, why not bunker down right there and you start directing traffic from right there? It just totally makes sense to run the show from right there in the White House.
It absolutely does. And, better than anyone, probably the risks of transit during high intensity situations when things are fluid, they're dynamic, they're moving second by second, literally. Trying to move about amongst all of that chaos is the last thing you want to do unless you really, truly, and desperately need to. And prior to this arrangement with the White House ballroom, I would submit to you that a serious nation state attack that was able to penetrate U.S. air defenses aimed at the White House and various components of the U.S. Capitol, that would cause a very serious situation where someone that was at the White House would be unlikely that they would survive such an attack. They would have to be in transit. This situation, I think, creates a redundancy in the U.S. government, but it also allows for future projection of strength. In other words, you're not going to be able to get to us based on the most advanced weaponry that we have and technological analysis that we have access to at the present day in time. And it stands to reason that as we go forward into the 22nd century and the 23rd century and so on and so forth, technological enhancements would be made commensurate with the time and commensurate with the flow of information beyond this period that we're living in now. So this is one of those ballast tanks that has to happen in order for there to be world peace. A lot of people don't realize that President Putin has had a similar project under construction beneath the Kremlin, outside one of the Kremlin's main parking areas. And so this is something that's not, it doesn't get talked about a lot in Western media, but when you look at the redundancies being built into the system, they are bypassing these elements of sort of elbow leverage in the middle that the intelligentsia community has had by virtue of the landscape that existed. The requirement for a head of state to be in transit to a secure location during an imminent attack. That's a very vulnerable position to be in. The flow of information to that head of state, and how does that information come from within the bureaucracy that has established itself inside of our military systems? While we ask that question, I think another question to ask would be, how do we bypass that bureaucracy entirely? These types of secure location facilities that are no doubt fed by passageways that the public is not going to be aware of, these locations allow for the rapid responding mechanisms that I think ultimately prevent situations that could go very, very hot very quickly from being that intense, or perhaps even from spawning off whatsoever.
Wow, brilliant. I had no idea that they're doing that on the Kremlin. So it makes sense that we would do it here in the United States. 9/11, whether you believe it was foreign intervention or deep state inside attack, you have to protect for that as well. And Donald Trump is very brilliant in that aspect. So this is a great discussion just on the White House itself. Now let's move to Iran and what's going on over there. How long do you think? Now I said from the beginning, after having been in the Middle East for decades and fighting against Iranian-backed, Hezbollah and Hamas and all these different elements that are out there, that Iran has been paying to, go against us everywhere I was at, whether it was Iran, whether it was Iraq, whether it was Afghanistan, Libya, in Beirut. It didn't matter. It was all Iranian-backed. So taking them out is the obvious thing that needs to be done. Now, taking them out through diplomatic means is never ever going to happen, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's fascinating. I think my thoughts on the Iranian situation are of two dimensions. And, those dimensions, I think, are of the surface level gains and the obvious need that you spoke of just a second ago. We cannot have any governmental faction anywhere in the world that is primarily compromised by secret societies and the intelligence community. And that's been going on in Tehran since well before 1979, but it was certainly solidified in a big, big way in 1979. And at the same time, I think there's a subtle underground aspect to it, both literally and metaphorically speaking, that's happening right now, especially in the area of the Strait of Hormuz and that bottleneck, which is causing so much scrutiny for a lot of these, cargo vessels and companies that are passing through there. I think that's a bigger angle in some ways, but it's certainly a very important angle nonetheless. And when we look at the holistic situation, it makes a great deal of sense why it had to be done this way. And I completely empathize. I want to say this, on your show, Mr. Jacob. I completely empathize with patriots out there who are quite frankly tired of fighting wars and not putting the main focus of the moment on America and the needs of the domestic citizenry here in the United States. I 100% empathize and understand that position. Likewise, at the same time, two things can be true at one time. We have a worldwide criminal syndicate that has nodes that have to be destroyed. Those junctions are going to be physical in nature. They're going to require kinetic force. In many ways, they're going to require very advanced and complex kinetic force and very precise application of that force. And so you really can't ask that sort of, combination of variables to come together outside of a couple of different high-level militaries out there in the world. And one of those militaries is the United States of America. And it stands to reason, based on the geopolitical balance of the entirety of the planet, from Russia's, interagency partnerships with various Iranian financial institutions to Beijing's obscene level of trade and commerce and arms dealing that was happening inside of Tehran at the time. It made much more sense, I think, to look at the U.S. military as being the favorite entity for dealing with that situation. And a lot of that comes back to the Western intelligence community that got a foothold in that area of the world in the early 1950s. The CIA was there on the ground operating and establishing regime change operations and strategic business flow plans for the nation as early as 1952, 53, and 54. And in 1979, we had what looked like an anti-Western government propped up, but that government was propped up on the backs of a lot of European oil magnates, a lot of Swiss financial trading giants, and quite frankly, interagency partnerships that were still happening through programs like USAID and the State Department with agencies there on the ground inside of Iran over the last 50 years. So this entire puzzle piece is more complex than we were ever told or that we were ever taught. And indeed, with President Trump having to balance the treacherous and treasonous mainstream media in this entire progression of events, it makes a great deal of sense that less is best when you talk about information in an active warfare situation. Now, I want to talk for a second, and I've been pontificating for a moment here, but I want to talk for a second about the actual nuance of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz, because it highlights, I think it paints a really good example of the types of activities that are occurring within mainland Iran as well, but to a lesser degree because of the need of the U.S. military to not be on the ground there and so actively involved. But with the Strait of Hormuz, we recently saw the Iranian Navy, not the Iranian IRGC, but the Iranian Navy as a distinct separate entity, seize a cruise ship that was flying under, I believe it was a Monrovian flag, or maybe Monrovia was in the name. You'll have to pardon my forgetting there on that particular aspect, but it had a Greek ownership background, and the ownership was traced pretty easily through public documents to Technomar Shipping Incorporated, Technomar Shipping Inc. Now, Technomar is a large vessel conglomerate out of Greece that handles a lot of logistics variables for third-party clients, planning and execution of those logistics. They handle a lot of leasing, and they lease out a great deal of the commerce that they broker for other partnerships, especially for larger giants that don't want to pay each other so much. So they rely on a mid-sized giant, if you will, or a mid-sized company to handle some of that. Technomar fits that mid-size area. And one of Technomar's largest institutional clients, and one of their oldest, going back to the late 1990s, was Evergreen Marine. So when you look at what's happening there in the world, why was this ship specifically chosen for seizure by the Iranian Navy and not simply extortion of a toll and passage? Because it's actually more economically beneficial to them as well as to the IRGC. In other words, both entities would have a vested interest in trying to ensure that the commerce can still happen because of the situation that's now happening geopolitically as well as internationally and financially through the Strait of Hormuz and the connections of these digital systems at world financial levels. So the fact that neither of those entities, neither the Iranian Navy nor the IRGC, attempted to facilitate the trade, the successful completion of the cargo and the transit of this vessel, in and out of the strait, but rather seized the vessel entirely when it didn't stand to offer anything really of value to them. I checked the manifest. There was a great deal of oil, which they already have. There's a few other things on there as well. Obviously the manifest won't declare hidden documentation or whatever. Excuse me, I want to be accurate for your audience. Manifest summary, not the actual manifest, but the summary that you can download and get online. But regardless, the vessel itself didn't seem to have any materialistic appeal for the Iranian military to seize it, unless they were just attempting to make a statement or there was something else going on. I postulate that because of the connections to Evergreen Marine and this particular shipping company's broader connections to a lot of questionable activity on the high seas, including dealing with Somali pirates, I think it's very, very fascinating that that's the vessel targeted in these operations.
Yeah, wow. Takes me back a little bit to when we're talking, Greek, the Aristotle Onassis. The connection there with Jackie Kennedy, and the Evergreen. When I was into SEAL Team 6 and so forth, Evergreen was kind of like a cover for the CIA. I don't know if that still exists or they pass it on or what. Probably haven't passed it on. So when I hear Evergreen, I think instantly of CIA. So there's probably some kind of connection there going on. Greek. So the Greek entry into this is very, very interesting. And we've seen a lot of that. Tom Hanks in Greece, trying to hang out in Greece. We've probably seen that he's a pedophile. And even the Greeks are like, who, when you think about the Greek army in the past, in Spartan times, they were, fond of each other. So, yeah. So we see a little bit of that happening still, of course, I'm sure, throughout history. But we have Tom Hanks as basically the Greek government is like, you're not welcome. I was like, really? Wow, that's pretty impressive. So yeah, something going on there with the Greek side. Maybe they're trying to clean their act up. Maybe they're trying to get involved in even more nefarious ways. So pretty crazy. All the different things we can look at. Squeezing China, through the Strait of Hormuz, through Venezuela. Look how easy it was for us to go in and get Maduro, who seems to be, from a lot of sources, giving up a lot of information on a lot of our congressmen and women and senators that were probably involved in drug trafficking. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, it's fascinating. Without the published documents, I think it would have to be speculation. But when you look at Peter Tickton's own words, which I was, very blessed to host him on the show back in January. Peter Tickton,
nice.
being one of Trump's attorneys.
Great man. Yeah.
He came right out and said the best thing that we got out of the entire Venezuela situation was Maduro. And the reason for that, extrapolating, I think, running with the logic train just a little bit, is the amount of information that someone at Maduro's intersection would have with respect to dark operations happening out of Venezuelan jurisdiction, but attacking a number of different jurisdictions around the entirety of the planet. And it's a very long and storied history of the CIA's involvement. Uh, you know, oh, think I lost you there.
No, you're still there. Good.
Okay. But there's a very long and storied history with the CIA's involvement in South America, and Venezuela is one of the crown jewels of where they like to hang out and dictate shadow policy that affected the entirety of the Western Hemisphere. And because it affected the United States, it had the double hop effect, if you will, or the pass through effect of changing and altering and shifting things at the geopolitical level worldwide. So when you look at what's happening right now with respect to the military operations being planned on Cuba, with respect to the Caribbean mafioso situation being brought to heel for over a year now by the U.S. Coast Guard. We see a lot of blazing headlines, and then those headlines give way to the next high sequence of high sensitivity or high intensity events. But people forget that these operations continue night and day and night, all through the background, working all through the process. And there is a tremendous amount of work to be done with cleaning up this hemisphere because of the infiltration and, quite frankly, the infection of the entirety of the secret society-backed intelligentsia community for over 75 years at this point. Really, I think you could make the case going all of the way back to the post-Civil War period, and certainly since the assassination of President McKinley. But looking at what we've got going on around the entirety of the world, and Venezuela's component in that, Venezuela's connections, where was Venezuela connected at the geopolitical, financial, or otherwise level in the lead up to 2020? Well, they were connected to Iran, they were connected to China, and they were connected to Serbia. And the only one that hasn't been involved in this entire discussion just yet is Serbia. And I don't expect that will be very long in the wings. It looks like there's a pretty volatile situation sort of developing in the far southeast Europe, over by what was Macedonia and what is modern day Yugoslavia and Serbia and that Kosovo area. And all of that, I think, stands to show that there's a shaking out happening where these nodes that we referenced earlier in the call are being attacked and handled individually, case by case, based on the best benefit that they can yield for us as an alliance moving forward at the present time. Maduro is clearly a wealth and treasure of information. I think he was taken out of there not by the U.S. military as some trophy haul, but as an arranged plan to provide for his safety and survival, because I think he knows, frankly, too much. And I think one of the entities he can give way too much up about is the Cuban mafia, who had 36 individuals, 36 men around him within his personal orbit the night that he was extracted by U.S. Special Forces. So looking at what's happening right now, I think this is a cascading sequence of events in a silent warfare capacity that, with the inauguration of the Iranian conflict and what is soon to be a massive expansion of the Ukrainian conflict, I think it's going to be a shock and awe style expansion coming from Russia within certainly within months, but it could be within weeks, but certainly within months, as that situation continues to grind on and cost both of those entities far too much time and treasure. As we look at that, I think the shadow war going on in the background is becoming public with these different spawning off points, much that a volcanic eruption becomes known first through geyser holes that begin throwing up lava shots or magma bombs before the main eruption from the top of the crater. And I think that's the period of time, quite frankly, that we're living in right now. And based on the pace of events, I think we're likely to be much more accelerated in a very short period of time.
Yeah, very good. Wow. You brought up the, Ukraine Russia thing. I think that's going to drag on. I think that this war, if we want to call it that, with Iran they're going to drag it on a little bit. We'll see what that's all about. Because if we do, because President Trump said, I think it was today, that they were planning on hammering them again, but the Gulf states said no. And interestingly, the Gulf states did very secretive strikes when they said they're stop the press on the war, but they actually went in and did secretive strikes. So yeah, there's lots of intrigue and stuff that's going on. I think this is going to get pushed probably past the election. I don't know. I don't know how long if it could really last that long, but the United States is supporting the whole world right now with the oil. So I think that's working out really good for us in the world. So we'll probably see in Venezuela, of course. Venezuela, look how easy that was to take Venezuela, and there's no fighting from the people. It's probably going to be the same thing with Cuba at some point when we do. I think physically at some point go into Iran. I think it's going to be the same. The people are going to rise up. They're waiting. They've been sacrificing themselves, throwing themselves at this regime. If they have just a little bit of help, I think it's going to tip over very quickly.
I do as well. I think you have a coalition building situation that has to happen on the ground inside of Iran, and it really is up to the Persian people to decide how they want that landscape to look beyond this period. Quite frankly, I've wondered if maybe one of the reasons we keep seeing this moving of the goalposts with respect to actually bringing the conflict to an internationally recognized close might be because the Persian people on the ground haven't had enough time to coalesce together. Whether they're going to coalesce against the USA, whether they're going to coalesce for the USA, I think that decision has yet to be determined for them as a culture, and that has to happen. That's what self-determination is all about. The world really has not been given an opportunity like the present time period for each major power and most, if not all, of the major ancestral powers to have a self-reflective moment on what they really truly want and how they want that to be. And spoiler alert for the American people, we've not had that moment yet. It's coming. And so looking at what we have playing out right now towards this 250th birthday party, towards what I believe to be a serious societal scale momentum that's going to come moving forward here into the future, it's actually very, very exciting when you look out for the long-term viewpoint and sort of appreciate the evolution of the process. It's like pulling up a lawn chair in front of the oven and watching the cake bake in there. As you watch that process, it can be boring at times. It can also be stressful at times. If you've overdone something or messed the recipe up, it can be harrowing or catastrophic. But regardless, it is witnessing the process of change as it unfolds consciously. And I think that's what's happening right now for the American people. And it yields us to a very optimistic future. And at the same time that these opportunities are being given for all of these different cultures, including the West, to decide what self-determination really actually means for them, you're seeing the kinetic destruction of an architecture and an infrastructure that has physically, kinetically, harmonically, on a basis, on a photon basis level, on a wavelength basis level, on a frequency basis level, on a number of different dimensionalities. When you look at both science and spirituality, that infrastructure has suppressed and held us back tremendously. We are incredible beings, and that's sort of the summary of the message I think I want to leave with everyone today, is the fact that we are, an incredible power to be reckoned with when you look at the connection of God's Holy Spirit to us and what can actually be brought out of us for the rest of the world. And it does not have to be, and I think this is the lesson of all this period of time that we're living, it does not have to be in a form that leverages valuation against each other. That is what the debt enslavement system has done. It made each of us collateral for one another and so robbed us of our humanity. Now that we're in a position where the transaction and intersection of commerce, the transaction of finance, the movement of value from one place to another does not have to depend upon a collateralized human being. What is the potential that we're going to actually experience? I think that's the great question of the day.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's what I love why I love having you on. You're so broad in the scope of everything that you cover. One last question, if I may, the election coming up. We're seeing like today, there's lots of pre-election type stuff that's going on where people are being decided on who's going to go forward. We're seeing a lot of military types that are going up against Thomas Massey, one of my old commanders that I work with at SEAL Team 6 and also at SEAL Team 4, the last one I was at. He was a commander there. Is Ed Gowrain. So he's running against Massey. He's very much slated to win. President Trump has backed him. We're seeing a lot of this. So we're seeing a cleaning up, I believe, of the what do we call them? The rhinos. So the rhinos, I think, are getting washed out, and we're getting and I think in this midterm election, we're going to have a super red wave, maybe even a tsunami, like we've been talking about for many years, but has been stalled out and stolen. I think this will be the time. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I absolutely agree. Let me take the question in two parts, because my thoughts on it, sort of like everything else, are pretty broad. But with respect to Ed Gallray, the Thomas Massey race, I think that represents fundamentally a changing of the guard.
Mm.
I myself am not a huge fan of some of Gallray's political backers, but I love the man's ethos and his history. As we look at what stands to happen out there in the world, I think it's crucial to judge people by the actual activities, the actual actions that come, but examine them with scrutiny against the backdrop of every other influence or confluence that might be in the equation. And certainly when you look at the pedigree of Massey and how long he's been in Congress, and some of the issues that were never really vocalized or verbalized by him, even in mainstream outlets, and that all of the way from mainstream outlets down to local town halls and press halls, right, until the Trump era came along, and all of a sudden things became important in some fashion or in some way. I also have suspicions on Mr. Massey, and this isn't accusatory in any fashion. I don't think that there's been any wrongdoing, but I have suspicions about his position on the certification of the 2020 election. It makes me wonder about things, and it causes me to reflect and step back against the pedigree again of how long he's actually been in the Congress, how much money he does derive from the Congress on paper, which is less than a lot, but it's still a substantial amount. And if you have someone that doesn't really have a great deal of financial obligations downstream to speak of, then overdrawing by a little bit as opposed to a lot of bit is perfectly acceptable, because it creates that same sort of ease and flow. And so again, not accusatory of any particular behavior, but I'm optimistic to see this race pan out, and I imagine that there is going to be a Trumpian victory, if you will, with it. What happens with Mr. Gallray down from that point, I think is the crux of the matter. And again, I'm optimistic to judge people based on their actions. I'd like to see what positions he does and does not take. And again, we have to keep in mind, like we were talking a minute ago, some of those actions may have to be based on information that we, the people, have to have a bit of a delayed access to under the current construct, because our favorite online entity told us all of it's going to be done according to the letter of the law. If we don't do it by the books, even if the books suck, if we don't do it by the books, we're no better than they are. And we have to have that moral maturation through this process, because with the advent of AI, we are going to be wielding daily in our hands civilization ending capacity technology. We have to have a real, I think, introspective evaluation of how we handle things politically, how we react to things both politically and emotionally, and how we interact and interrelate with one another, going forward. And this Massey race between him and Gallray, I think, is a referendum in many ways on that exact component. The other side of the equation, and I've waxed so long, I forgot part of the other question there, but if I'm not mistaken, it dealt with this broader situation domestically with the United States. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but as we look at the transpiration of events that goes forward from here, I think what we're going to see is a very controlled demolition of certain components of the American system that may be long-standing, and in some ways may actually have some novel appreciable value from a nostalgia standpoint, but nonetheless represent significant satanic victories over we the people that we just simply cannot allow to have that allow to stand and proclaim that sort of victory going forward into this new age. We really are transitioning the world from an era, an epoch, epoch, of darkness into whatever this season and era and great period of awakening will become with respect to light. And I think the potential there, like I was talking earlier just a few moments ago, I think the potential is virtually limitless, but I really don't think we have a concept on how far it can go. But what we do know for sure is the political landscape and our faith-based landscapes, which deals with our introspection and our concept of who we are and who we are under God and who we are under creation and who we are interacting with the entirety of the world and with each other around us. Those areas really have to, transform in a positive and beautiful way to see the rest of the process through. We're talking about unveiling potential interactivity with non-terrestrial sentient life. We're talking about validating or invalidating sweeping passages of various spiritual and faith-based texts that in many cases go back thousands of years. We're also in the mix of all of that. There's this unveiling that continues to happen with the Apocrypha and all of these discussions that are now happening at broad societal scale about certain omitted texts from the biblical Old Testament that really do fill in a lot of the blanks on, why the era of Joshua had to be the way that it did, why the enemy that we fight is how they are, and what the actual genetic reason is for what's actually happening in the world, what those forces that grabbed hold of our governments in the background, who and what they really are. And so I know I'm off on a tangent here, but I guess, ultimately what I would come back to say is that,
Love your tangents. Go for it. Yeah.
well, all of that is to say that as we look at the evolution of the process and we consciously become aware of it, I think that's the moment of greatest victory. It is becoming aware of our own advancement, of our own leveling up, if I can use that terminology that's popular with all of the digital age folks out there. We are achieving a new scale, a new dimension of what we are and who we are. We're reclaiming a lot of it, I think, because some of it I think we knew well into the past. That's why there have been these great resets to destroy those advancements and those moments of ascension, if you will, that we've achieved in ages bygone. But now we're aware of it consciously and collectively, and for the first time that we know of, we're aware of it simultaneously with one another across international boundary lines. There's people that will be watching this broadcast and others from all over the planet who are learning and watching the unfurling and the unveiling and the becoming of this great period of God's winning that I think we're going to experience as this 250th birthday year for our culture really gets off the rails. It's a really, really exciting time to be alive, despite the fact that I paid $4.55 a gallon for gasoline just earlier today.
Yeah, the price of freedom, sometimes it's tough. So SG, fantastic having you back. We all love you, missed you. Glad you're back out there, giving us your wisdom again. Fantastic show as usual. We had people from all over the world. We had South Africans, chiming in. So there's, like you said, this message goes out to the world, and the consciousness and so forth. And yes, we don't always agree on, not you and I, but some of the people that watch us. But yes, we don't always agree on, who's going to be elected, who's not going to be elected. But we do agree that, we all love each other and that we're working together to make America great again. So thanks so much for coming in. And how can people reach you, SG?
Well, thank you for having me back. It's been a great privilege, and it has been too long. With respect to finding me, I can be found in the same 4 places online that I've always been. I'm on rumble.com at the handle Q News Patriot. So that's rumble.com/user/Q News Patriot. I'm not on Rumble by the name SG Anon, actually, but I am on Truth Social at the handle Real SG Anon, REAL with a red check mark, REAL SG Anon with a red check mark. I'm on X at the handle THEQ News Patriot with a blue check mark, and I can be found on Telegram now as well, t.me/real REAL Q News Patriot. It's been a wonderful privilege to be here, Mr. Jaco. God's blessings, and hopefully we're able to do it again soon.
Absolutely, SG. Thanks a lot. And thanks for everybody that joined us, and we'll see you guys next